You know that voice in your head, the one that replays the email you shouldn't have sent, the one that tells you what everyone secretly thinks of you, the one that wakes you up at 2 a.m. to remind you of something you said wrong 6 years ago. Most people think that voice is just who they are. It isn't. It's a loop, and loops can be rewired. A study out of the University of Zurich found that self-referential thought patterns, the kind of thinking where your brain constantly loops back to evaluate you, light up the same neural circuitry whether the thought is true or not. Your brain doesn't check facts before it spirals. It just runs the program it's been running the longest. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. The average person has somewhere between 12 and 60,000 thoughts a day, and researchers estimate that up to 80% of them are repeats. Not new thoughts. The same handful of thoughts, worn into a groove, playing on rotation. The Japanese have a word for the practice of interrupting that groove. It's not meditation, not exactly. It's older than mindfulness apps and stricter than journaling. It's called Naikan, and it was built by a man who spent 3 weeks locked in a room with nothing to eat, nothing to read, and 3 questions he was forced to answer over and over until his entire way of thinking cracked open and rebuilt itself. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through that system, the same 3 questions, the same 21-day structure, through the story of a man named Owen Marsh, who used it to stop a thought loop that had already cost him his job and was working on costing him everything else. Before I get into it, if you're someone who's tired of being at war with your own head, subscribe to the channel. I put out videos like this every other day. Practical, a little uncomfortable, but useful. Drop a like if this is already hitting close to home. Now, Owen. Owen Marsh was 33 and ran an 11-person sales team in Chicago. On paper, he was fine. Good salary, decent apartment, a girlfriend named Wren who taught middle school and laughed at his bad jokes longer than they deserved. But Owen had a specific kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. It came from the fact that his brain never actually stopped talking. It started small, the way these things usually do. A client would go quiet for 2 days, and Owen's mind would spend those 2 days building a case against himself. He's ignoring me because I messed up the pitch. He's telling his boss I'm incompetent. This is how it starts. This is how you get fired. This is how everyone eventually finds out you're a fraud. Most of the time, the client just had a busy week. It didn't matter. The story had already run its course inside Owen's head, and the damage from a story you tell yourself doesn't need external confirmation to feel real. At work, this looked like hesitation. Owen second-guessed pitches he used to deliver without blinking. He rewrote emails 4 and 5 times, not because they needed it, but because some internal committee kept vetoing every version as not good enough. Too much, too little, wrong tone. At home, it looked like distance. Wren would ask what was wrong, and Owen would say nothing, because explaining that his brain had spent the last hour narrating a hypothetical argument with his boss that had never happened felt insane to say out loud. The turning point came in March. Owen gave a client presentation that went fine. Not great. Fine. On the drive home, his mind replayed it 11 separate times, each time finding a new flaw, a new pause that must have looked weak, a new sentence that must have sounded stupid. By the time he got home, he had convinced himself the client was going to walk. He barely spoke to Wren that night. 2 weeks later, the client did leave, for reasons that had nothing to do with Owen's pitch and everything to do with a merger nobody had told him about. But Owen didn't know that. What he knew was that his internal prosecutor had been right, and that confirmation didn't quiet the voice. It fed it. His manager pulled him aside a month later. Not a firing, not yet, but a warning, dressed up as concern. "You seem somewhere else lately." Owen nodded and said he'd get it together. The same promise he'd made to himself roughly 400 times that year. He didn't know how. The problem wasn't a lack of effort. He was trying constantly. The problem was that the thing doing the trying was the same mind running the loop. Ren was the one who found Kenji Sato, through a colleague whose brother had done something at his center. Nobody could quite explain what, only that he came back different. Quieter, not sadder, just settled. Ren didn't push. She left the address on the counter one morning with a note, worth a shot. Owen almost didn't go. He sat in his car outside the building for 6 minutes, running his usual internal debate. This is a waste of time. This is exactly the kind of thing that doesn't work for people like you. Before he went in, out of exhaustion more than hope. The space was small. A wooden floor, low light, cushions along one wall, and nothing on the others. No motivational posters, no calligraphy. Kenji Sato was 61, narrow-built, with the posture of someone who'd spent decades sitting still on purpose. He didn't stand when Owen entered. He just looked at him and said, "You've been arguing with someone who isn't in the room." Owen laughed, uncomfortable. "Excuse me? Your face. You walked in still finishing a conversation with someone who isn't here." Kenji gestured to the cushion across from him. "Sit. Tell me what you think you need." Owen said he needed to stop overthinking. Kenji shook his head. "That's what everyone says. Thinking isn't your problem. You have a very specific kind of thinking, and its job is not to help you. Its job is to keep reviewing the case against you so thoroughly that you never have to risk a verdict." Owen didn't understand that yet. He would. Kenji explained he ran a small practice built around Naikan, a Japanese word meaning roughly looking inside, developed in the mid-20th century by a merchant named Yoshimoto Ishin. Yoshimoto had put himself through a brutal Buddhist practice called Mishirabe, locking himself in a room for days without food or sleep, sitting with nothing but questions about his own life. He spent the rest of his life turning that extreme version into something people could actually survive. "It is not therapy, the way you think of therapy," Kenji said. "There is no talking about your feelings in circles. There are 3 questions. That's the entire method. That's it? That's it. And it will be harder than anything you have tried." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kenji wrote them on a sheet of paper and slid it across the floor. What have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? What troubles and difficulties have I caused this person? Owen read them twice. This seems like it's about gratitude. It looks like gratitude from the outside. It is not gratitude. Gratitude is a mood. This is an audit. Kenji tapped the page. Your mind runs one operation all day. It reviews what has been done to you. Every slight, every silence, every unanswered text. That's your loop. A constant tally of what you're owed and where you've been wronged. This question flips the camera. Instead of asking, "What have I been given unfairly?" you ask, "What have I actually been given?" Specifically, and what have I actually given back? He told Owen to start with Ren. Not a general reflection. Yesterday, specifically. What did she do for you? What did you do for her? What difficulty did you cause her? Owen felt his mind drift toward the general and flattering. She's supportive. We're a team. Kenji stopped him. Not stories. Facts. What time did she wake up? Did she carry something you didn't notice she was carrying? Owen thought harder. Ren had gotten up 40 minutes early to grade papers so she'd have the evening free. She'd texted a reminder about his dentist appointment because she knew he'd forget. She'd said nothing about him being distant for 3 weeks. "And what troubles did you cause her yesterday?" Kenji asked. This was the part that hurt. Owen had come home distracted, hadn't asked about her day, spent 40 minutes rereading a Slack message instead of listening to her talk about a difficult student. He'd made her repeat herself twice. "Write it down," Kenji said. "Not to punish yourself, to see it. Your mind has kept a ledger your whole life, but it only records 1 column. Tonight, you start recording all 3. He gave Owen the assignment. 21 days, 10 minutes a night, 1 relationship, 3 questions, written by hand. The first week was worse than Owen expected, and not for the reason he thought. He assumed the hard part would be discipline. The hard part was what the questions surfaced. On day 4, doing the exercise about his mother, Owen found himself in tears at his kitchen table, not because the exercise was sad, but because his internal narrative about her, the one where she'd never been proud of him, didn't survive contact with actual facts. She had driven 4 hours in a snowstorm for his college graduation. She had called him every Sunday for a decade without missing one. The prosecutor in his head had simply never entered that evidence. On day 9, he almost quit. He told Kenji the exercise was making him feel guilty instead of better. Kenji didn't soften it. Guilt is what the truth feels like when you've been avoiding it. You've spent years building a case that the world failed to appreciate you correctly. That case protects you from a harder question, whether you've shown up for the people around you the way you believe you have. This isn't punishment. It's accuracy. Your mind has been running a distorted ledger, and distorted ledgers produce distorted totals. Owen kept going, mostly out of stubbornness. Around day 12, something shifted. In a meeting where his manager questioned a number in his report, the old spiral started. He's building a case against me. But before it could take hold, a fact interrupted it. His manager had covered for him on a missed deadline 2 weeks earlier, without telling anyone. The thought didn't erase the anxiety, but it broke the momentum. There was a half-second gap between the trigger and the spiral that hadn't existed 3 weeks before. Kenji told him this was the actual mechanism, not mysticism, not willpower. The prosecutor in Owen's head had run unopposed for years, because it was the only voice with evidence on file. Naikan wasn't teaching Owen to feel differently. It was forcing him to gather counter-evidence, specific and undeniable, and file it where the old evidence used to sit alone. There's a reason this works, and it isn't spiritual, even though it comes from a spiritual tradition. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has described how the brain's self-referential circuitry, centered in the default mode network, strengthens through repetition, the same way any neural pathway does. Whatever story you rehearse most often about yourself becomes the one your brain reaches for automatically. The default mode network doesn't distinguish between a true story told 1,000 times and a false one told 1,000 times. It just reinforces whichever one gets rehearsal. And this is also, not coincidentally, the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, developed decades after Naikan by psychiatrist Aaron Beck, who discovered that depressed and anxious patients weren't suffering primarily from their circumstances, but from consistent, factually inaccurate patterns in how they interpreted them. Beck's method was built on examining the actual evidence for automatic thoughts. Yoshimoto Ishin had built essentially the same mechanism decades earlier, from a Buddhist monastery, using 3 questions and a notebook instead of a clinical framework. By day 18, the exercise had stopped feeling like homework and started feeling like reflex. Owen caught himself mid-spiral at work and instinctively asked the Naikan question without meaning to. What has this person actually done for me? Not what do I assume they think of me? What did they actually do? He brought this up with Kenji, half expecting congratulations. Kenji just nodded once. You'll still have the thought. The prosecutor doesn't retire. What you're building is a second voice with better records. Over time, that voice gets faster, because it's had more practice being called on. That's not magic. That's repetition, same as anything else you've gotten good at. Owen asked what happened after 21 days. Did the exercise end? The formal version ends. Most people keep a version of it running quietly for the rest of their lives, because once you've seen your own ledger clearly, it's very hard to go back to lying to yourself about it. 6 months later, Owen was still at the same job, still with Ren, and by any outside measure his life looked almost identical to how it looked before. That was the part that surprised him most. He had expected transformation to look like a different life. Instead, it looked like the same life, run by a different narrator. The spiral still showed up, A quiet client, a pointed comment from his manager, an unanswered text from Ren. But the spiral no longer had the room to run uncontested for hours. Somewhere around the second or third loop, a quieter, more specific voice would interrupt it. What do I actually know? What has this person actually given me? What have I actually given them? He kept the notebook going, not every night anymore, but most weeks, especially after arguments, especially after the days that used to end in silence at the kitchen table. Ren noticed before he told her anything about it. She said one evening, almost offhand, that he'd started asking her real questions about her day instead of nodding through it. Owen didn't explain Naikan to her that night. He just said he was working on something. Here's what the 21 days actually did. It didn't silence the voice in Owen's head. Nothing does that, and anyone selling you that promise is selling you something that doesn't survive contact with a bad Tuesday. What it did was give the other side a case file. Specific, dated, hard to argue with. Every day you spend running the same accusation against yourself without evidence is a day that accusation gets a little more automatic. Every day you spend gathering the actual facts, what you were given, what you gave, what you cost someone, is a day the other voice gets a little more evidence to work with. 3 questions. 21 days. Written by hand. One relationship at a time. That's the entire system. It looks too simple to work, which is usually the first sign that it will. If you've made it this far, you already know which relationship you'd start with if you tried this tonight. That's usually the one worth starting with. If this helped, subscribe. The channel puts out a video like this every week. And hit like if you're planning to actually try it, and not just think about trying it. Because that gap is exactly the one this whole system is built to close. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one.